For those of you who don't know me, I'm Bart Stone, and I've been tasked with giving you guys a presentation on mountain flying. So I'm going to go over a lot of material. So if you can hold your questions to the end, you know, we'll leave a little bit there. But I tried to condense a lot of flying into a real short 1 hour presentation because I could talk to you all day on this. But, anyway, that's me. Currently a check airman for Russ Flying Service. I got a business, own aviation services. I worked for the government for a number of years. This is a picture of me and my parents. I grew up in a place called Truckee, California. It's 6,000 feet. My dad was a pilot. That was one of his airplanes. That's my mom. That's me on the day I sold it. They were so proud. You see how they're smiling? But a little background. So I learned to fly and I sold it in a J3 Cub on skis, 6,000 feet, 85 horse. My dad was a caretaker of an emergency Army airfield during World War II. And he used this airplane to maintain the airway beacons between Reno, Nevada and Albany, California. So every night he'd take off and fly that route. He also taught me how to fly helicopters. He had a Bell 47 D model with a Franklin at 6,000 feet. What can go wrong? First of all, it's a Franklin. So anyway, that's my background in aviation. He was a forest ranger for the U.S. Forest Service, but because of his aviation background, he got the Forest Service involved in fire retardant and fighting fires with early aircraft. That's where I got my first job. I was like 18 years old flying TBMs, and a little bit of nepotism there. But my dad spearheaded a lot of the Bori bombers. At that time they had TBMs and F-7Fs and stuff like that. So he was pretty involved in aviation. I was involved in aviation quite a bit at that young age. I came to Alaska in the mid-60s or so, late 60s, and I started my own flying service. And I took the Ranger engine off this thing. I stuck a 985 with a cowling off of a Beech 18 on it. I had my own 135 certificate. It was called Start Terror Airlines. I didn't have a lot of customers, but I had a lot of fun. Even though it was restricted, I still was for charter and hire and everything else. I didn't know anything about that. And there was FAA wasn't around by then. But anyway, instead of being a bush pilot, I was a bushy pilot. Then for about 27 years after that episode, I went to work for the government, and I became the chief pilot of the Department of Interior for Alaska and lower 48. And I flew all sorts of nice exotic equipment. The Aleutian goose, Pinocchio that's hanging in the museum out there, or hanging in the airport, 789, the gooses and stuff like that. So I did a lot of firework, a lot of migratory birds, a lot of animal tracking, everything else. That was my background in the Department of Interior for 27 years. Then I quit and I retired, and I was traveling that kind of footloose and fancy free, and Todd Russ called me and said, "Hey, would you like to go to work for us?" And I said, "No, not really." And he said, "Well, I got a turbine beaver for you to fly." And I went, "Oh, okay, now we're talking," you know. And we didn't talk about money, but anyway, that's my daughter with me. The first summer we had this at Russ, and down at Chinitna Bay, landing on the beach down there. So that's where that's at. And you know, if you've got a lot of money in your bank account, even though you love your kids, cut them out. Don't give them any inheritance. just go buy yourself an airplane like this, and you will have a lot of fun. Stick it on 36 or 40-inch tires. Yes, super cut on steroids. So that's what you need to do. So I'm going to talk about mountain flying as it pertains to all over the state. And if you look at all the sectionals, there's only one place you can find where it says rapidly rising terrain, and that's in Adigan Pass. So you should be aware, you know, that all passes have rapidly rising terrain, low visibility, they all suck. A lot of people go through Adigan Pass, but if you go 30 miles west, there's a pass that's 2,300 feet lower. If you go Taylor Pass, and then if you go a little bit farther, you go into Adigan. There's 3 passes to the west, about within 70 miles, that are all lower than Adigan Pass. And you can see right here, the elevation of 4834. And we're going to talk a lot about passes. There's a lot of major mountain ranges in Alaska. There's 3 major ones: the Brooks, the Alaska, and the Aleutians. But 30 some odd minor ranges, like the Talkeetnas, the Chugach, stuff like that. Coastal range down towards Juneau, Wrangels. I carry a lot of passengers, and one thing I like to rub into, a lot of people come from Colorado because they're so proud of their 14ers. You know, the 14,000 footers. You say, well, we don't even name our mountains in Alaska until they're about 15,000. So anyway, and then I also tell a lot of Texans, I say, don't just stop your bullshit. You know, we've got Alaska and half, you'll be the 3rd largest state. So then there's 50 mountain passes with charted elevations. Brooks Range has more area than all of Colorado, but 40% of that is mountain plains. So for us to operate in and out, wherever we're at, southeast, out west, up north, we got to traverse different mountain ranges. And all these mountain ranges back up a lot of different weather systems. And they can spill over. Even a simple one like down there at Portage, I've seen close to an inch of barometric pressure between Whittier and Portage. What's that do to your clearance altitude trying to go through there? So I'm going to talk a lot about weather. And when I get up in the morning, I've got a good idea where I'm going. You know, maybe I'm going to Brooks Camp, maybe I'm going over by McGrath, Galena. Wherever I'm going, I've got a good idea where I'm going to do my weather briefing and stuff like that. And so have a good idea to how you're going to brief things out, how you're going to look at things, but it takes me about 15 minutes to do my complete weather briefing at home. And by the time I get to work, I've already decided whether I'm going to go or not go. And so I just walk in to the dispatcher, Russell, and I go, no, not going. Okay, but wait a minute, have you checked the weather? Yeah, I checked the weather. So anyway, this was out west, we were tagging, this is when I worked for the Department of Interior, we were tagging muskox out there and putting collars on them. 4 types of nasty weather in Alaska. Number 1, when you're down and it's kind of marginal, you're ducking and weaving, and maybe you're not ducking and weaving, but maybe you're down low, or maybe you're in Bethel where it's a solid 300-foot overcast and visibility unlimited. Yeah. You know, that's, we'll talk about minimums. Double dog shit. You can start having marine mixing coming out of, let's say, Cook Inlet. Marine mixing, which will start mixing a lot of cooling temperatures from the water, from the land to the shore, the water, and that's called marine mixing. And things can change in a heartbeat from double dog to double dog with diarrhea. And if you fly down, let's say from King Salmon, and you start flying down the chain towards Cold Bay and Dutch, down low, which I used to do a lot of surveys out there. Going from double dog to double dog with diarrhea, it can happen in an instant. And I'm going to give you some hints and techniques on how to observe that. Everybody's got different minimums. Do not fly where I fly. I'm not going to fly where you fly. Set your own limits. We're going to talk about limits, VFR limits, and stuff, comfortable limits. But anyway, and then smoke. And smoke is, everybody saw what happened like 2 years ago when they had the big fires in Siberia. You know, everything around here was blanketed. And there was a lot of flights that didn't get completed that summer because smoke is really insidious. I used to do a lot of fire suppression and stuff like that, like I said, when I started out young. You can go in and out of smoke, and 1 minute, you know, you've got a good, you know, 3/4 of a mile visibility and stuff like that. The next minute, you've got to be on the gauges. It happens that fast in smoke because it can get really embedded, you get really thick areas, especially if you don't have a lot of wind blowing around. But that's how I deem them. And, you know, I've got friends that are flying, and if they get the number 3, you know, it's like, and they're reputable, then you don't even think about going and flying. So on my weather briefings, like I said, it takes me about 15 minutes. I got a couple of places I go to talk about weather. I'll go to the National Weather Service. I get the area forecast. If I'm going across any ranges into a different geographical area, I'm going to get a different set of ideas on what I'm going to be facing over there. And the National Weather Service on the area forecast is the nitty-gritty. I have 4Flight app, and that's what I first look at, and that's the one on the left there. And you can put it in all sorts of criteria, like on here you got winds, but it will show you whether the airports are green. If they're green, then it's good to go. If it's blue, they're marginal. Go to windy.com, which I'm going to cover all these in a little bit here. That reaffirms what I've already talked about to the National Weather Service and 4Flight. Got weather cams all over the state. If you're transiting Canada, moving airplanes back and forth up and down the Alcan, they got lots of weather cams. But you got to remember about weather cams, they're only right now. If you look at a weather cam, that's all you're seeing is the current conditions right now. You can look at it, you can do trends, and I'm going to show you how to do trends on the weather cams, and you can see if the weather's moving in or moving out. Local lodges, we call local lodges all the time, see what's down on the ground. And all the lodges we generally go to, we've talked to the people, we said, that's a mile over there. That's 500 feet on the ridge above your place. And so when they give a weather report back, we got them pretty well trained up, so they give us good weather reports. And when I'm starting out on 4Flight, you know, I look at the overall conditions where I'm going, and then I check the MEDARs and say this is on Kenai Municipal. Down here it shows a green symbol, so it's pretty nice weather that day. You go into the aerodome forecast right there, the next one over, and that gives you more ideas of what's going to be happening at that aerodrome throughout the day. If it's going to be VFR, you might only have the current conditions and maybe the forecast conditions in 2 hours. All that stuff comes off of it. So much for that thing. All that stuff comes off the MOS next to the TAF up there. That's the modeling index that ForeFlight uses. And so the modeling index actually looks ahead for several days on what they're seeing the trend's going to be happening where you're at. Then you go to the daily. I just do a daily, just get temperature, dew point, rain, snow, get an idea. Just I'm reaffirming my decision-making process. I'm making myself feel better. If I don't start feeling better about my proposed flight plan, wherever I'm going, then I start stepping back and looking at the numbers a little bit more carefully. I do a real rough estimate. If it's within the Anchorage Bowl, South Central, I'll just check the elevations on wind at 3,000 feet. If I'm going to Denali on that day, I'm looking up at 12,000 feet. Just getting a general idea what the winds are going to be doing. So on windy.com, you know, you got all sorts of things there that we can get. We can get the highs, the lows, the weather patterns. You got a big low here out south of Kodiak. It's got a wind blowing in to the passes here. You can click different elevations on that right here on surface. But you know, if I'm going to be landing over here at Chinitna Bay or Crescent Lake, or I'm going to go to Katmai, I'll check the surface winds and I'll maybe go up to 2,000 feet. Whatever path I'm going to go through, I'll check the elevations above the passes and down in the passes. That's going to give me an idea about rotor clouds and stuff like that. I see a little bit higher at 3,000 feet, that same picture on that same pattern. Winds out of the southeast at 47 knots. You're going to get the shit beat out of you going through the mountains. You know, there's no way to get around it. But you can use all sorts of stuff on the side. You got clouds, swells. If we're going to Prince William Sound, I'm going to be checking the swells and the waves. The longer time on windy, on the swells, the longer time difference, that's when you get the biggest waves. So if we're going to Tucka Bay or Halibut Cove or over in Prince William Sound to one of the canneries, you start looking at the swells and the wave direction. And a lot of times, they'll show you on Windy T, they'll show you the waves are coming this way, and it's going to show you the swells going this way. And I tell you, if you got a big time period between the swells, like 8 to 10 seconds, you're going to be dealing with water over your head. So a 5 foot, 6 foot swell, that means it's actually 10 feet, right? Because you got the trough and you got the crest. So you got to learn how to use all this stuff on the time. Temperature, dew point on the side gives you an idea whether you're going to be, facing some sort of issues there on freezing, temperatures and stuff like that. Alaska weather cams, they're only good for right now. So you look at, say, Beluga, if we're going across to the west, you can look to the northeast and the southwest. You get an idea down here. You can get some weather data. But weather trends, if you do the loop, let's say you look at the southwest here, or southwest. If you do a loop, it will show you whether the weather is clearing up or moving in. So it can give you good input. There are some flight service stations in Alaska, wherever you're at, if you just call them and say, can you check the weather cam? You know, if you're en route somewhere. Can you check the weather cam for me, say at Iliamna? They say, yeah, some people say, no, I can't do that because of the liability. And they just tell me what it looks like. So you can always call back, or if you got a satellite phone in your airplane, you can call back to your base, like you call back to Lake Hood for Russ, who I'm currently flying for. And I say, what's the weather cam show, in Lake Clark Pass? And right now, the weather cams are all down in Lake Clark Pass. So the NOTAMs usually on both the Ford Flight and both the Windy T will come up and show. Right, you know, they're posted immediately. So it's really good for planning right now. It should be reaffirmed if you're going through a range and you can call a friend or anybody else on a satellite phone. We all have an airplane, right? Yeah. So you can always check weather that way as well as you're en route. So coming and going, just check your weather constantly. Like I said, we call the lodges. There's a lot of privately owned weather cams, say between here and Rainy Pass. There's 3 of them that are privately owned that you can, once you know the website, you dial them in, and they're usually working really fine in the summer. People power them up and they go to their cabins and stuff on airstrips, but there's a lot of private weather cams as well. In particular with this location, I'm going to talk about it in a bit. I'm going to talk about these ridges behind the Bear Mountain Lodge, which I go into twice a day, usually when I'm working. And one of the airplanes we're flying down there. But those mountains up there behind there, they're 3,000 feet, and some of the old passes right behind the trees are 2,000 feet. So you check the weather on Windy T, and you check the ridges and the wind aloft on that ridge. If the winds are out of the north on that ridge at 20 knots, I just won't go, because I know I'm going to get the hell beat out of me when I get down there. And the customers are not going to enjoy it at all. They're going to be throwing up all over in the airplane and having a bad day. Down at the lodge, it can be perfectly calm. But the strip out in front of here, right behind me, it's only 1,000 feet long. It's only about 50 feet wide. There's a sliding turn. You got to do a rudder turn on approach to get into the thing. So there's not a lot of room for error. And it's on the beach. So all weather reports are helpful. If you're going to the different lodges, they all have satellite phones. They all usually have people monitoring. They're in the office. They usually have people monitoring 122.9, whatever the common traffic advisory is. You can raise them and ask them as well. So this is right out of the Aviation Weather Handbook, which probably most of you have never read since you got your private pilot license, right? It's really good to have in your option. I've gone through that section enough. Okay. Anyway, it's adverse winds are what's going to affect us highly in all of our transiting and stuff like that, and through passes, across mountain ridges and stuff like this, because we don't have a high, our airplanes don't have a high threshold for pain. Now this valley and mountain winds, this is out of the same book, and they don't represent the typical Alaska weather we get into. This would represent typical Alaska weather on these, what you find up in the Brooks Range, because there's no glaciers. But, you know, in the morning or in the daytime, you got a lot of updrafts, warm air going up, cool air coming down, that's in the blue. Maybe some cumuliform cloud forming on the ridge tops. As long as they just sit there and they don't move, you know, you can get an idea that the winds aloft are pretty stable. At night, as things start cooling down, you've got a lot of downdrafts coming off those ridges, and you've also got down the valley winds, which kind of lift up because they're warm air, and they're still wanting to lift up like warm air does. It tends to rise. So those are good for maybe the Brooks Range, but they don't represent flying west of here, east of here, north of here. Think of it this way. Other than Antarctica and Greenland, Alaska has 5/8 of the world's glaciers. That's huge. 5/8 of the world's glaciers, not including the Antarctic and Greenland. So you got to think about what the glaciers are going to do to your weather, because they create their own weather systems. So even if you're going through, let's say, Lake Clark Pass, and you got all those little glaciers feeding in around the pass there, feeding in on Blockade Lake and stuff like that, they can affect the weather there. The National Weather Service, Windy T, all the other weather places won't give you. They don't give you that current conditions created by glaciers. So I'm going to talk about 3 different approaches here that we generally do a lot of, and how it relates to this slide. And we're going to talk about Crescent Lake, which is right stuck in underneath Mount Redoubt. Chinitna Bay, which is down by Eliana Glacier, or Eliana, Mount Eliana, and the Denali approach. If you're up flying and you can see a ridge on top and it's got a cap cloud on it, it probably means there's high winds up there. First of all, it just gives you a good indication, boom. So like if I'm going to Denali on my weather sources, I'll check the winds aloft at different altitudes up there. But if there's some cap clouds and you hadn't checked the weather, that's going to give you a warning that there's probably some activity up there. Generally, we go up to about 12,000 feet, and this is your elevation over here, if we're going up to Denali. But on Crescent Lake approach, there's a lot of rotor systems. If the winds are out in the north, about 20, like I said, Chinitna, I know they're 30 miles away, I won't even go there. At Crescent Lake, you can get there, but what you have to do, you have to come in right here at the bottom of the hill, the bottom of the valley, right over Crescent Lake. If you try and cut down through those rotor clouds, everybody's going to be thrown up in the airplane. They're not going to be comfortable. If you get down on the bottom where these rotor clouds here condense, there might be some small movement, but you're not going to get thrown around a lot. You're not going to be losing full control. So a lot of times when the winds are smoking at Crescent Lake, which is a huge lake to land on, and you can find a place even though the winds are blowing, I come in low to avoid that rotor cloud if I know it's there, and you can't tell it's there. Some days it's just perfectly clear, and but there's still rotors there. They're still active. So you got to kind of sniff it out. But you can start looking at like up on Redoubt, which way is the steam coming out of the volcano? You know, what's the grass doing down on the hillsides? What's the alders doing? If you can see the shiny side of the alder bushes and you're flying along, it's smoking on the ground. You know how the leaves turn up like that? So that's going to be a good indication. So you got to be totally observant, not only up high on wind and stuff like that, but you want to be looking at the vegetation, because the vegetation is going to tell you whether you're going to get beat up or not. So on Crescent Lake, I come in low up that valley, up Crescent Creek. So much for that again. That's what you do when you deal with John Pratt. Maybe you should take care of this like it takes care of everything. Chinitna Bay, you can't make an approach around the corner and come in there low. Usually when you got 20 knots on top of the ridge going in Chinitna Bay, you're going to have water spouts out in the bay. And I've seen up to 7 water spouts and in there, and it's full deflection. And that is not happy for your people in the back. Whee! Blech. Denali approach, we usually start out just about the agriculture area and start climbing. Because if you don't start a cruise climb, by the time you get to Denali, if you try and fly along here like this and then climb up, you're not going to outclimb the mountain. It doesn't matter what you're in, even in an otter, turbine otter, ain't going to work. But if you start climbing, say at the edge of the agriculture area, as you're coming up through there, do you see any cap clouds? Well, no, maybe there's no cap clouds up on the Denali. So what's the winds doing? Look at your ground speed on your GPS. As you get closer and closer to getting up to about 12,000 feet here, so you can fly around the mountain, show the tourists all the nice things. If your ground speed's gone from, let's say, cruise climb at 95, and now you're down to 70, you know, you're just stopped. You're not getting anywhere. It's a good indication up high when you get to your destination. It's going to be really turbulent because there's a strong, strong wind blowing at you. So a couple of different things to think about, but you should always use your GPS anyway on like approaches. If you're coming in approach, use the GPS to check your ground speed. That 1,000-foot strip in Shenitna Bay that we land on, and the Aravan and the turbine otter, a mile short on either way, east approach or the west approach. I've seen up to 10 to 12 knots difference. And they got a windsock at both ends of their strip. And sometimes the windsocks are doing this, pointing at each other. Sometimes they're pointing away. But use your GPS because that's going to be imperative for you, checking your ground speed to do a go-around early. You should always be prepared for a go-around. Glacier winds. Glaciers create their own weather. And Denali is a huge, huge weather system up there. Usually you got, like this is the roof of the amphitheater here, and I'm up about 10,000 feet per near, somewhere around there. But you'll get downdraft going down this glacier, and that's the problem with landing on the glaciers. Like if you come into base camp and you come in at 7,200 feet and you pitch up and you go to full power in the otter with landing flaps to get up the slope, it's like that. Now you got to get out of there, and the winds in the glacier are down glacier, and you want a long takeoff. Have 8 people in the back of the otter, you know, with a tailwind of 20 knots. You got to get back to Talkeetna because you got another load of people to bring up there, or back to Anchorage, whatever you're in up there. So they create their own downdraft a lot. By the way, like this little bridge right there, that's where Don Sheldon built his first octagon in Ruth there. That's called the Mountain House. That hill far over there at the top, that's the gargoyles, Moose's Tooth, and stuff like that. Another interesting photograph on this is this is like a cat that day. It was just kind of over still, but you see it's kind of almost lenticular. Well, the winds are pretty strong on that, but look way out down the route there. You can see the remnant, that little teeny cloud right up there. That's the remnants of a rotor cloud. So as you're approaching something like this, you got to start looking outside of the cockpit and paying attention to what are the clouds telling you. An example of glaciers creating their own weather. We take people up to Yellow Jacket Lake, and when I drop them off, give them a piece of surveyor's flag. And I say, you call us in the morning when the weather's good, or call us in the morning and give us a weather report. If it's hanging down flat, we're gonna come get you. If it's hanging out like that, like about a quarter out, we might come get you. It's been rare. Spend a few extra days. If it's sticking straight out, like that, they're holding it out and it's sticking straight out. I say, we'll come up tomorrow maybe, give us a call at 6 in the morning. Nice windsocks to have. Because Yellowjacket Lake is over the gargoyles there to the left in the Talkeetna Ring. Sits at 5,873, 5,873 feet above sea level. It's 1 mile long. If there's a downwind movement on the glacier of 8 knots, 10 knots, you're not going to get out there, even in the Beaver with a supercharger on the front. It's easy to identify Yellowjacket Lake. Right at the outlet of the lake are 2 airplanes. They're both 170s. One's yellow, one's blue. They're all tough. Biggest pieces are about this big. Oh, that must be the right lake to land on. There's Don Sheldon's Rex. Anyway, Don Sheldon flying in and out of that lake with 145 horse 170s. Learned, well, he never did learn a lesson. It was hard-headed. But anyway, they do create their own weather. And in particular, like Yellowjacket Lake, which is where a lot of sheep hunters like to go in the Talkeetnas. You have a high density altitude, 5,873, downwind glacier. You can go in there okay, but coming out, I always come out of there with a real partial fuel. I have enough fuel to pick up the people if the weather's good, up to 3 people in the Beaver, and that's all I'll ever pick up. The weather's not, windsock is kind of hanging there close to the decision-making point. I'll take 1 person, run them down to Snake Lake, which is about a 12-minute flight away. Go back up, pick up the 2nd person. And now if the wind is still the same, I'll go back down, pick the guy up. I dropped on Snake Lake, take the 1 guy out of Yellowjacket, and leave the 3rd guy there going, what about me? Sorry. And then I gotta go back to Fish Lake and Talkeetna and get more fuel. Because I don't want to get into my reserves. But you gotta go up there empty, almost, and run it on fuel. So plan your fuel load accordingly. Look at the weather, have somebody on the ground giving you an accurate weather forecast. And don't go if it's not favorable. Low altitude wind shear, a lot of good things there, but the important thing is here, like I said, 20 knots over the top of the ridge above Bear Mountain Lodge. That's 2,000 feet a minute. And I don't care what you're in, turbine or anything else, you're going to be hard pressed to outclimb that kind of downdraft. And I've had 2 scary experiences. One was in a 206, and I came from Homer, going into the Seward, came over the ridge, came right across the Hardy Nice Field, came over, looked down, could see Seward, could see the strip. I was on wheels. And it pegged out on the VSI, and my air started popping. Just, Jesus. It was just like an elevator. The other thing was, I was flying Pinocchio, that 754 that's in the airport out there, down off of Icy Cape, which is down below Yakutat, before you turn in towards Gustavus. And it pegged out, it had a VSI that went up to 3,000 feet a minute. And it pegged out on that VSI, and that was the Taku winds coming off the coastal range there. It just sent me down like crazy. And all you can do is go to maximum power, max continued power, keep the wings level, and don't try and outclimb it. Don't pitch up. If it's pushing you down flat, just ride with it or turn around. Do a 360 and get the hell out of there. So, you know, if it's pushing you down and you try and climb, all you're going to do is get really close to the stall on it and then everything else goes to hell. So anyway, 2,000 feet per minute, you can't outclimb that kind of stuff. It doesn't matter what you're in. Maybe an F-16 or something like that. Adverse weather practices. Now, legal 502, that's a 135 thing. So what looks good at, like I said, figure 8 lake, and what looks good at any of the passes could be entirely different. The big picture area forecast. Best practices, look outside for traffic, weather, confirm everything. If equipped, use your terrain page. Anytime you go through the passes, if you got a GPS that shows the terrain page, put it on. Because I'll show you here in a second, you can come around the corner and it'll just be a wall of weather, and now you're wishing you had that terrain page already up, because now if you're sitting there fiddling, how do I turn the terrain page on? You can't be inside your cockpit, you gotta be flying the airplane looking outside, and already have that set up inside. In turbulent weather, going through a path, don't use full flaps. And an example of that is this is out of Kodiak, plus 3.49 Gs and minus 1.4. The important thing is, look at this dirty here with the flaps out, a plus 2.0. They never tested it negative. You know what it's going to do? We had a wreck about 15 years ago when I was in OAS, and one of the real famous pilots out of Talkeetna, Don, he had 3 Park Service people. He was taking them in the base camp and hit turbulence. The wreckage was scattered over 3 miles, 3 square miles. It completely tore that airplane apart. Took the flaps off the wings, took the ailerons off the wings, separated the elevator and the stabilizer, and just shredded it. But alongside the cab, alongside the fuselage, where you would normally have 40 degrees of flaps in the 185, there were crease marks on the fuselage. And that's how NTSB figured out he had full flaps and when he came apart. So, the ability to withstand Gs is lowered tremendously. There's no negative Gs published. Nobody's ever done that, because it's a very dangerous area to do test pilots. They test pilot, but every aircraft has flight load factors, and we're going to talk about that. So VFR minimums. What's the VFR minimum Class E? Who gives a shit? I mean, if you're out there running the Scud, you can't say, "Oh, I better turn around." You don't have time to be looking up your book to see if you're legal or not. You're going to be doing other things. The employer weather minimums, like 502 for Russ. What's your personal weather minimums? Do you have some set? I put out a video a long time ago. It's called Flat Pipe, and it's really good about picking your altitude, staying with your altitude. If the clouds are sloping down, you come to the clouds at your altitude that you feel comfortable at, just do a 180 and get the hell out of there. In other words, you got to make a decision early. Does it change if you got family on board? Oh, I got my grandchildren on board. Are you a little more cautious? Why so many? Why so many minimums? Fly the safest. Would you fly where I fly? No. Would I fly where you fly? No. I mean, we've got people I've known around. They're no longer here. They're deceased. Because their weather minimums maybe fluctuated with how the day was going, or how many cups of coffee they had, or something like that. They should have just had one standard and stuck to it so they could make an early 180 and get the heck out of Dodge. Here's a real simple way to tell distances. And you can stick up here in the second line, it says 6,000 feet per nautical mile. You can stick in 5,260 for a statute mile. So you figure that all out, you can do 80 knots per 3,600, this is all knots. That's 45 seconds per nautical mile. You can use GPS distance with landmarks, but lo and behold, right across the line are the power lines, west of the power line bend. Each tower is 1,320 feet apart. 4 of them are 1 mile. So, fly out towards Figure 8 Lake, let's say 700 feet. And look down there 4 towers, or 8 towers, 2 miles away, and fix a spot on the cowling, like a rivet line or something like that. Now go back out and fly that same thing, come back the other way at 200 feet above the ground. Is it kind of hard to see the 4th tower, 5th tower, 6th tower? You see what I mean? You get lower, your sight picture changes on what you can see out there. But that's a good way to check that. Those are 1,320 feet. Gives you an idea of distance out, which you can see, but fly it once at higher altitude and then once it, if you're running Scud. And it's an entirely different picture, and it's an entirely different attitude on the cowling or something like that, a rivet line where you can see up. You know, one of the neat airplanes was a French copy of the Beaver called Roussade. And on that airplane, out on the struts, they had marks at 500 meters, 1,000 meters. You know, you can look right out on both sides, they had them. And you could draw a line from, say, 1,000 meters on that side, from that strut around to this strut. Okay. Everything within that line, at the line, you can get to, you can glide to if you have an engine out. Anything an inch below, about an inch or so, they call it centimeters or something. You can get to that point and do a pattern. Do one turn. Anything above that line that you bring around, you're not going to make it. And when I was in OAS, we used to put electrician's tape on the struts. Because we went out and tested this, and we fixed it up. And you could look out there and you could generally see in an emergency what you needed to apply. But, you know, fix some references. Either on the cowling for distance and visibility, stuff like that. Mountain passes. Nice picture of cruising along. The engine quits. Pretty high, right? The engine quits, what are you going to do? Go to the bottom, where all the big trees are at, and the rivers go like this. Why not just turn to the snowbank here, approach it at a 45-degree angle. This is not mountain climbing, but it's thinking of what you're going to do. What if, what if, what if? Fly to a point, 45 degrees, clean. In the last 10 seconds, pitch up, start up the glacier and put in full flaps at that point. You walk away, the airplane will be fine, won't be damaged. You go down to the bottom where all the trees and the alders are at, might not be so great. You can land on hillsides, speaking of emergency landings, you can land on hillsides and alders and put little or no damage to your aircraft. I do a class as well on how to crash an airplane. Charter passes, there's over 50 of them in Alaska. Only a third of them have weather cams. The elevations that you see, they're depicted or at the bottom of the pass. Charted elevations don't account for anything. Merrill Pass. This camera is below the pass. this camera's 1,000 feet above, 1,100 feet above the pass. So you come in here and you see all that shiny aluminum on the ground there, and you keep on going. Now, you get here, it's kind of crunch time. You gotta make a decision. Are you gonna go down towards the Stony River? But there's no room right here. If you're 500 feet above the deck to do a 180, there's no room there, except if you're in a helicopter. So, I just come to the pass right there. Now I'm looking down towards this river right here that's on the edge, called the Nikon. That's 8 miles away. I'm gonna push your nose over. Go down, blow this stuff. Have you got a plan? When you come out of that on the Nikon, if you go left, there's a lake there, Twin Lakes, stuff like that, if you're on floats. If you're on wheels, and the weather closes in, over here, off the Stony, is a 1,500 perfectly usable strip. You know where that's at, in case you're having, maybe you swallowed a valve and your engine's trying to shudder and shake. You get down here and say, oh, piss poor decision, I'm gonna turn around and go back up. Because whatever you're flying in, your Belchfire 3000 or something like that, or your Super Cub, can you outclimb that hill going back up towards Merrill Pass if you follow the clouds down? No, ain't gonna work. Down in Whittier, there's 2 cams. You know, west cam 166 at the baggage center, and then the other one, the east cam's at the airstrip there. When I used to fly helicopters, I swing loaded a 206 from here, a 185 from here, and the remains of a Cub from here. People tried to get through there. So you see the pass is really low. It's 500 feet above. It shows you right here, 546 feet, about 400 feet above for the pass from the camera. You're gonna sneak over into Prince William Sound. Now you go over and you push down into Whittier, and it's raining like a son of a who. Really smoking. And this is a really bad decision. I can't get out. I want to go to Titlik and have a hamburger. You know, well, that's not going to work. So you got to turn around. Now you turn around within 10 minutes. You can't get back over the pass because it looks pretty bad. You got rain on the windshield. And you got to land on a 1,500-foot strip. It's gray, made out of shale. It looks just like the roads. It looks like the mountain. Not the best. If you would have said, what if, back there over Portage Lake, you'd be a lot better off. What if? What are my options if the poop hits the fan? Now, there's a lot of passes without charging elevations. Suslota, Lake Clark Pass is one. Right there at Summit Lake. That's a plus minus on there. You know, you don't know what the elevation is on uncharted passes. Maybe you can see here, have you got the current barometric pressure before you come into the pass? Either way, from north way or from looking at it. Did you reset your barometer or barometric pressure before you left that area? So, Mystic Pass, terrible, terrible pass. Matter of fact, you know, they took Mystic Pass off of sections. It no longer shows Mystic Pass being a pass. And I think it's because of all the wreckage down there at the bottom. So they took that out. The Goat Trail, if you want to cut off about 50 or 60 miles, if you're coming from Canada up through Northway and stuff like that, you can go on the Goat Trail, that cuts off 50 or 60 miles of line. Concerns: no chart elevation, no cams, lack of verifiable atmospheric pressure. You know, there's a weather cam there, and it's not co-located with the Northway radio. Did you get a hold of them? Can you raise it? You know, that's not the time to be thinking about resetting your your altimeter. Lake Clark Pass. So you got weather cams, both ends great. Are you prepared for low weather scud run? It could be different on the other side of the range, different weather systems. You have to think about these things before you go in there. You know, the summit is just 56 feet below the west cam, or the summit lake. When you come around that corner, and I'm going to show you, you got a limited amount of time. The GPSs that we have in our aircraft that we fly, there's over 1,600 of these locations with the squares, flags on them. And all these ones going through Lake Clark are plotted, so they're right in the center. There are known elevations on each one, so when you come through right here by the Big River Lakes and you're going to the east end of the Narrows, you know what the elevation is at the east end of the Narrows, you know what that line is. So let's go from the Narrows, the east end right there, up to the west end where the other weather cam is. It doesn't matter whether you're flying 70 miles an hour, 70 knots, 80 miles an hour, 80 knots, but to go between the east and the west through the Narrows is going to take you 3:15 to 4 minutes. And you come around that corner at the weather cam and look down towards Summit Lake. Maybe it's down, really, really down. You can't even see Summit Lake. And you're already at maybe 400 feet, 500 feet when you come around the west end of the, what do you do then? That's what I'm saying. You stay in the center, not the best, because that's usually where the DC-6s and the C-40s, because from Everett's are going back and forth at 200 feet. They do. I mean, they go back and forth through those passes, right at the bottom, because they have to do approaches and stuff into PA and non-Dalton and stuff like that. But you don't have a lot of time. You got 3.5 minutes. And that's why it's important to measure something like over on the power lines to get it. How much time is that?
Well, you might be running a little bit behind, Bart.
Okay.
Keep going.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I said I got a lot of information I'm trying to pass to you without getting lost. But when we get over to the path, I'm going to talk about it. When's the last time anybody in here practiced a steep turn? You know, if you haven't practiced one in a while, go to 3,000 feet. I wonder why. Go to 3,000 feet and do one to the right, one to the left. What's a steep turn? Anything over 45 degrees bank, right? But when you have to make a decision in the past, are you going to do a right-hand turn, a left-hand turn? What are you going to do when you're down low? There's not a lot of difference. So we're going to whip it around, and now it's raining, and your windshield's kind of fuzzy. Are you going to do it looking outside? Are you going to go into the gauges and look at the gauges? Can you make that transition instantaneous? Because it might save your life. So anyway, you got to think about, well, I'm going to stay to the right side of the valley here. We're going to stay to the left side, and the cloud cover might dictate which side you stay on. But once you get around the corner, right there, just below the west camera, there's a 600-foot strip there in case you have to land. If you come down here to Glacier Fork at the end here, right past Summit Lake, you go up Glacier Fork about 1.25 miles, and there's a 1,200-foot strip. You know, do you know those areas when you're flying through the passes? Fix them in your mind where your out is. What if? What if? What if? What if? What if? I might be paranoid, but I'm also 82 years old, or going on 82, and I'm still commercially flying. I've not killed myself yet. Yeah, I'm good. proficient in making these steep turns with no loss of altitude. And we're gonna talk about limit factors, because there's maximum values that airplane can withstand. And the load limits that are, you saw set on, like that Kodiak, are load limits that are done through testing and everything else with a clean airplane and not a bunch of, a Cub with a 60-inch rack hanging on the side. That affects the dynamics of your aircraft. I'm hurrying as fast as I can. Stall speed, 60 degrees bank. 208, 185, 206. Nothing published on the Cub, or 12, or anything like that. On the newer top Cubs, they got nothing's published either. Why? Because they'd have to change the flight manual. That's why you never see a lot of changes. They say, oh, refer to the original manual. Guess what? In the de Havilland products, like the Otter and the Beaver, the stall speed when you're dirty goes up close to 40 knots. Goes up instead of down like these do. It's just the way the wing is built. When you got the flaps hanging out like that, the ailerons are drooping down in both those machines. It's a bad combination. So you got to be aware of the load limits. Are you prepared to crash land on purpose? If you get over there and it's bad conditions, should I maybe put the airplane down? That's a really tough decision. If you do it under power, under your control, you pick out a little bend in the river and stuff like that, you'll probably walk away from it. There's lots of alder bushes down in Lake Clark Pass you can land in just fine, and all it would do is take some duct tape and you could be on your way again. If you have a satellite phone, Henry, did you file a flight plan? Speaking of flight plans, you're entering the pass. Yeah, Kenai Radio, this is Belchfire 2000. I'm going east end of Lake Clark Pass. Visibility is pretty low. Ceilings are, there's no ceiling, it's right to the ground. But you gave a pilot report. They know where you're at. They said, well, you last reported in at the east end. That's another advantage of doing pilot reports. Are you going to make the decision to turn back early? Almost twice a year to go to Chinitna to see bears. Almost twice a year, I turned around within 10 miles of the lodge. And sometimes I've turned around right over the lodge after trying 2 attempts. If I don't make the first attempt, I'll try it one more time, and that's it, folks, we're going back to town. I just won't keep trying. I gotta turn around immediately. So you've gotta make the difficult decision and go back. I tell the passengers, hey, I'm sorry we're going back. Yeah, I'm sorry that you're all out of barf bags, but enjoy the rest of the flight. But you tell them the positive part. Say, this flight's on Russ, you know, because you're not gonna get charged for it because we didn't take you all the way to the destination. Explain your passengers, set your limits, stick with them. There's always tomorrow unless you're dead. If you're flying with a pilot, see, that's an old pilot technique. You sit there, you lean forward, and you can see farther into the fog. But if you lean back a little bit, this is the most important. When you get in Scud next time, and you're flying, and you're comfortable, you got your limits. Bart said, set your limits. Okay, here's my limits. Okay, I got 1.5 miles here. Kicking a little rudder. Holy shit. Oh, because you're used to seeing everything coming towards you, right? You're not used to seeing it go away from you. And it gives you a whole new perspective a scud run. I guarantee you. Because you second guess yourself and then you do a 180 to turn around and get out of the path. It's like, where did I just come through? I'm serious. Look backwards as well as forwards. And that little, going through the narrows there, I look backwards at least once, about every 2 minutes. Both sides. Look out the window. Keep the great side down. Any questions? Anybody got a question?
When do you
No
teach this
question.
crash course?
What?
When do you teach this crash course?
I used to teach it all the time when I was traveling for the Department of Interior. Did a lot of study, went down to National Test Pilot School, and then I took a huge course in at USC on how to crash. You know, and deal with G-forces and how to manage your crash. Landing floats, like 4 times out of 5, landing floats somewhere in the brush, like halters and stuff, you won't even see it the ELT off. If it's done right. I mean, you're just gonna go, whoop. But that's it with you in control. If you get to a spot that you lose all situational awareness and boom, all of a sudden there's a mountain goat standing right in front of you. What's that mountain goat doing here? Then it's too late. That's why I'm saying you gotta be able to make a decision, think about it, and sacrifice it. Never, ever, ever give your airplane a personal name. Ah, good old Yeller. I was Yeller, sinking airplane. Don't do it, because then you have attachment to that airplane. Oh, you know, you really do. So don't name your airplane. It's just a conveyance to get you from here to there safely. If you fly it right, don't name it, because that will impede your decision to put the airplane down and deal with the insurance people later. Any other questions? Good, I'm out here.
Thank you.
Thank you.